I'm live. All right. So, my name is Anna Imagination, and I have some things to talk about this morning. This is the first time using these text tools, so I'm really hoping my speaker, wherever it is on this computer, is picking up everything. But we're going to go ahead and get started. So, if you don't know about me, I am Anna, and I have been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder back in 2015, which translates into common tongue. It means I have multiple personality disorder. I am currently integrated. This means that I am in the process of bringing all of my multiples back into one conscious mind. Being a multiple has given me the advantage of understanding depths of identity that most people don't have. And every day is a massive awakening or epiphany for me because I walk away from something and well, I'm getting my head of myself. I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me backtrack a little bit. I know how to change. I have a formula that I created when I was 21 years old that I finalized. And I've been using that formula every day. Like whenever there's a part of my personality that I don't like, I pull out my formula, I apply my formula, I change, and the change sticks. And when I see something else about my personality that I don't like, I pull out my formula again, I go through my formula, and I change again. I think my record is 10 days. So I can go from one drastic personality characteristic or trait and completely alter it in 10 days. Not a 30-day building habit, not going through meditation and practicing day after day. I mean, 10 days. And how I do it is part of my Operation Imagination. I teach this technique to other people because I know how to change. And I've been doing this. I started this when I was 15 years old. I've been doing the research through psychology, physiology, I'm sorry, psychology, philosophy, sociology, and existentialism. And then in when I was 21, I finally received the core chunk of how I do it. And when I applied it, it works. So I am literally a conglomerate of everything I want to be, literally cherry picked and made into what I am. So, all that being said, being a multiple has allowed me this vast perspective to gain insight into our identity that a lot of other people don't have. And what I want to talk about in this particular video is that very thing, identity, and teach you what I have learned about our identity. The first thing that I noticed is when I went through psych studies and when I went through all these programs, there's a lot of information out there saying you can't love somebody until you love yourself, or love only comes to people who love themselves. And that's a great, and I remember when I first heard that line, I was very young, and I remember thinking, what do you mean love yourself? It did not make sense to me. It was very vague. And that's it. It's vague. It doesn't tell you how, it doesn't elaborate. It's just a vague, empty statement. And I, now, in hindsight, where I am now, looking back, I look at that and go, "Oh, that makes sense now." And it is vague, and it's a big topic that people try and condense into a sentence, and that's the best they can do. But because you've condensed a huge topic into such a small sentence, you've lost all the meat. And that's the problem. That is exactly the problem. So, this is the meat. We think that our identities are this whole, us as a whole, us ourselves. And when you have six personalities and six personas, each one with their own sexuality, their own religion, their own sexual identification, their own marital status, their own age, their own gender, you really get a different view on what identity really is. So, I'm going to tell you what I've learned identity is from a multiples point of view. Identity consists of all of you. And the difference between a multiple and a non multiple, someone with multiple personality disorder and somebody without, is absolutely very minimal. A person with multiple personality disorder just means that all of the parts that make up an identity are separated under their own consciousness. A non multiple, most likely you, is somebody who has all the exact same parts, but under one consciousness. And that is it. I thought going into multiple personality before I knew about it, before I learned anything about it, I thought that identity or someone with multiple personality disorder had more parts of their identity than a non multiple. I now know that's not true. And the more I adopted this new thought process, the more I can see it in other people and everywhere. It's amazing. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about all my multiples, and I'm going to show you how absolutely impactful this them being together versus separate it creates the identity. So I have 6 alters, and one of them is a man. One of them is bisexual. One of them is gay. The others are straight. However, one is monogamous, one is polyamorous, and the other 2 are committed to being single. That is just the sexuality. So I struggled with this contradiction. And our minds, some people struggle with contradiction and some people don't. And when you struggle with contradiction, our brain can't process it. And so it splits into compartmentalization or cognitive dissonance. It's a coping mechanism because contradiction makes us uncomfortable. So when you have multiple personality disorder, you take all of these parts, you reject the contradiction. I was a BDSM mistress and a hemp loving hippie. I wore leather, and this one was a vegetarian for animal rights. Now, in my brain, that created a massive contradiction that I could not process. So I rejected it by splitting the parts. The parts were there before the split. The problem with multiple personality disorder, not really a problem, but what happens when you have multiple personality disorder is you can't accept the contradiction of the self. So once I realized all of this prior to my integration, I realized that I had a massive problem with accepting contradiction, the contradiction of a BDSM mistress and a hemp loving hippie. And once I was able to accept that these were all of my parts and I love them all equally, and they all make up a part of me, all make up my identity, it all started to stack together. And I was able to integrate the multiples back under one conscious mind so that I feel all of the emotions and all of the contradictions at the same time. And that is how integration happens. But you have to make sure you have all the parts, including the core. First time I integrated, I did not include the core. So I had 6 of us and my core, and I was still rejecting the core. You cannot integrate if you reject any of you. I finally accepted the core, and I believe the integration will now hold. I am 2 weeks into my integration. And so far, I haven't split, I haven't divided, I haven't switched. On the other side of being a non-multiple now, let's take this into back to identity with a person who is not a multiple. Not being a multiple makes it harder for you to identify all of your parts. Until I knew about my dissociative identity disorder, I did not know, just like you didn't know, what all my parts were. But having multiple personality allowed me to dissect all of my identities. And I learned really that we are not made up of just one or two. We are made up of many. We are many. And I cannot emphasize to you how much, how many parts of us make up a whole. We're not talking 3, 5 different pieces of you. And I hear people doing this a lot. They downplay themselves, they oversimplify their identity. Where do you work? Who are you married to? Do you have children? Do you like animals? And our likes, our needs, our wants, our beliefs, our names, and our voices are all part of the identity. But that's only on the surface. We have a lot to our identity, and it's a lot to go through. So it's a lot of homework to sit down and really dig out who you are. And this is the big question: who am I? Now, the reason why this is so important is because you've heard the old adage, you can't get where you're going until you know where you've been. So I'm going to flip this around a little bit. You can't get to the person you want to be until you know who you are. And take it from somebody who knows. So once you identify all of your parts and all of who you are and what you are, then and only then can you make the change. And you'll know where to change to take it to the next level. That's what I do in my program, Operation Imagination. I dig right into your identity. I pull out your identity, and we identify exactly who you are on every level. And then I use my formula and we change the parts that you want to change. This applies to addiction. It applies to your romance, your relationship with yourself. Relationships, everything on the outside is a consequence. But everything, your relationship with yourself on the inside is the catalyst. And we have that backwards. This is why we're unhappy. It's because we spend a lot of time changing the consequence to influence the core. My approach, I go toward the core and I get right into the core and say, this is who we are. This is what needs to be changed. And when you change that, all the consequences follow. So if you have a good relationship, a good car, a good partner, a good, straight A student children, whatever you value, you have those things as a consequence to this. But if you aren't square with yourself, and you can do things to manipulate all the outside barriers, you can do things to manipulate your job to get money, to manipulate a partner to get the ideal partner you want. We do a whole lot of manipulating out here of consequences to get the desired results. However, it's for show. This is what we mean by authentic living. This is it right here. If you don't naturally have these things developed out of a consequence based off of your identity and your core, eventually they will fall apart. Eventually, you're going to spend a lot of energy and stress and time like a puppeteer, stringing it all together, holding it all together so it doesn't fall apart because you haven't earned them. To earn them, you need to be square with yourself, and those need to become consequences. So, I will be talking more about adjusting this core with your identity so that all these consequences outside of your life and filtering it fall into place. It's really incredible. So, getting square with your identity, wrapping this up. Well, that's my formula, and I'll be covering that later. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Anna Imagination. If you like the video, share, like, subscribe, and my website is www.angelabchrysler.com. All my links are below, and I am offering for a beta edition 50% off of my program, Project Imagination or Operation Imagination. Thank you so much for your time, and may the kindest of words always find you.